In the bustling city of Lagos, where the skyline gleamed with ambition and the streets throbbed with chaos, there lived a woman named Mama Kemi, formerly known as Chief Mrs. Kemisola Oletunji. She was not always known for her wealth, but for her strength. Her story began decades ago in love, and ended in the quiet ache of loneliness. Married to Chief Oluwaseun Oletunji, a man of great renown in the oil and gas sector, she had once basked in the joy of a fulfilled life. Their love was beautiful, their fortune vast, and their dreams for their 4 children, Olu, Promise, Kemi, and Miracle, seemed indestructible, but tragedy struck like a thief in the night. One foggy afternoon, a plane crash claimed the life of her beloved husband while he was on a business trip to Abuja. The news shattered her like porcelain on concrete. Friends withdrew. Family members who once filled their mansion in Ikoyi with chatter disappeared, unable or unwilling to stand with her through grief. Yet, amid the rubble of her brokenness, she rose, not for herself but for her children. At 38, she became a widow and a single mother to 4 small children. Though the pain was heavy, money was not her problem. Chief Oletunji had wisely willed all his companies and assets to his wife. With oil, real estate, and logistics ventures spread across Nigeria, she had inherited an empire. Yet, what is wealth without warmth? She traded evening wine tastings for PTA meetings, and luxury retreats for hospital visits. She sent all her children to elite boarding schools, hoping to give them everything their father would have wanted. As the years trudged on, the children grew and spread their wings. Olu and Promise, the first sons, relocated to the United States and climbed their way up the tech ladder, becoming respected ICT consultants. Kemi, the eldest daughter, married a wealthy businessman and moved to Port Harcourt. Miracle, the last-born, an apple of her father's eye, found love in Canada and settled abroad with her husband, but distance wasn't the problem. It was indifference. Their achievements soared, but their connection to their mother waned. Mama Kemi often sat alone in her large Ikoyi mansion, where the grand halls echoed with silence and the smell of past family dinners still lingered in the air. Birthdays came and went. Mother's days were marked by robotic calls and "love you, mom" texts. Her grandchildren became blurry faces on Zoom. She was the woman who had everything, except the presence of those she loved most. Then came Chinoza. A slender, soft-spoken Igbo girl in her early 20s. She was employed as a live-in maid. Chinoza's job was simple: clean, cook, and ensure Mama Kemi was comfortable. But their relationship quickly blossomed into something deeper. Mama Kemi found in her a companion, a listener, and eventually, a daughter. Chinoza wasn't just a maid, she was warm in the flesh. She helped Mama dress up for meetings, took photos of her at Owambi parties, laughed at her dry jokes, and prayed with her every night. She became Mama Kemi's shadow, her heartbeat. Whenever Mama complained about her children's absence, Chinoza listened, never interrupting, never judging. "God sees your heart, Mama," she would say in soft Igbo-accented Yoruba. And those words gave her more comfort than any child had in years. Unknown to the children, who were always too busy, a new family was forming in the mansion. One bonded by love, not blood. One that didn't ask for money, but gave time. While the world praised the children's success abroad, the true riches, those of love and loyalty, were being quietly deposited into Chinoza's heart. Mama Kemi often sat on her veranda watching the setting sun, clutching her chest as waves of loneliness hit her in silence. "What good is a crown?" she once whispered to Chinoza, "if there's no one to place it back on your head when it slips?" And Chinoza, wiping her hands on her apron, replied, "Then I will hold it for you, Mama. Always." Little did the world know that these small, sincere moments would change the course of their family forever. Despite the beautiful gardens and polished marble floors of the Oletunji mansion in Ikoyi, an invisible heaviness lingered in the air. To outsiders, Mama Kemi was the epitome of grace and success, still fashionable, still attending high society events, and still at the helm of her late husband's empire. But within the high walls of that mansion, she was a woman losing pieces of herself, one unanswered phone call at a time. It was mid-August when her health first began to betray her. Subtle signs. Fatigue that lingered longer than it should. A persistent headache. Shortness of breath. Chinoza begged her to see a doctor, and after much persuasion, Mama Kemi agreed. The diagnosis was quietly alarming: early-stage heart complications caused by prolonged stress and depression. The doctor warned her gently, "Madam, you need rest. Emotional rest. Emotional rest." That was a luxury Mama Kemi had not known in years. She kept the illness from her children, not out of pride, but because she knew what their response would be: indifference, disguised as busy schedules and time zone excuses. And true to her fears, when she finally mentioned it during a rare family Zoom call, the reactions came as expected. "Mom, you'll be fine," Promise said from his New Jersey office, barely looking up from his laptop. "Just take your meds, yeah? We should do a family trip someday," Olu added. "Maybe next year. Things are hectic at work now. We are just 2 promotions away from becoming partners." Even Kemi, who was physically closest in Port Harcourt, dismissed the news lightly. "Mommy, don't worry. Heart palpitations are normal at your age. It's stress. Just rest more. I'll try and come around before the year ends." But she never did. Mama Kemi was slowly breaking. She had fought wars for these children, labored through their school years, nursed them through malaria fevers, and gave up her youth for their comfort. And now, in the winter of her life, she was no more than a background notification in their minds. Chinoza became her pillar. She drove Mama Kemi to the hospital. She sat beside her during checkups, held her hand during injections, and whispered jokes to make her laugh. She even began learning how to cook Yoruba soups to perfection, just to remind Mama Kemi of her mother's kitchen. Chinoza's care was not transactional. It was sincere, almost instinctive. And over time, the line between maid and daughter blurred until it vanished entirely. One evening, after a long hospital visit, Mama Kemi looked at Chinoza with tired eyes and said, "If you were my daughter by blood, maybe I'd have known joy." Chinoza smiled softly. "Mama, love is stronger than blood." That night, something shifted inside Mama Kemi. She took out her old diary, the one her husband had gifted her on their 10th anniversary, and began to write. Page after page, she documented her pain, her love, her regrets, and her truth. She wrote letters to her children that she never intended to send. And at the back of that diary, in handwriting as shaky as her heartbeat, she penned down her revised will. Her lawyer, Mr. Ajayi, a kind, older man who had served the Oletunjis for over 30 years, was called the next day. "Are you sure about this, Chief?" he asked after reading her intentions. "You're disinheriting your entire lineage." "I am giving everything," she replied, her voice steady, "to the one person who loved me without a penny to gain." The will was signed in the lawyer's office. Witnessed. Sealed. Kept confidential. As November rode in, the quiet mansion bore witness to more silence than ever before. The only laughter was Chinoza's. The only footfalls were hers and Momo's. The house that once held the footsteps of 4 children now echoed with loneliness. Then, at midnight on a rainy Thursday, it happened. Mama Kemi collapsed in her bathroom. Chinoza screamed, rushed in, and held her as she convulsed, dialing the ambulance with trembling fingers. She was rushed to a private hospital in Ikeja. While machines beeped around the unconscious woman, Chinoza made frantic calls to all 4 children. Their responses were a chorus of apologies and delays. "I'm in a board meeting. Let me call you right back. Try not to panic, Noza. I'm sure she'll be okay." 3 days later, Mama Kemi drew her last breath, with only Chinoza by her side. As her spirit left, the machines wailed. Chinoza didn't. She sat still, clutching Mama's cold hand, staring blankly at the ceiling. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she whispered, You were more than my boss. You were my home. But little did she know, her trials were only just beginning. The announcement of Mama Kemi's death spread through the air like distant thunder, loud, unsettling, and disorienting. The first daughter, Kemi, received the call from Chinoza. The moment the words "Mama is dead" dropped from Chinoza's mouth, the line went silent. Then came the wails. Within 24 hours, Kemi was in Lagos, her face smeared with horrid makeup, her outfit an odd mix of grief and glamour. Her husband stayed back in Port Harcourt, saying he had urgent contracts to finalize. But Kemi wasn't alone, she brought her outrage. Her first act upon entering the Ikoyi mansion was not to kneel before her mother's favorite chair or light a candle in remembrance, it was to accuse. "You killed her, Chinoza!" she screamed, storming into the house like a hurricane in heels. "You poisoned her. You always wanted what belonged to us." Chinoza stood frozen by the dining table, her eyes hollow and red from crying. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her lips trembled, her palms clenched by her sides. She hadn't slept in 3 days. Hadn't eaten. The grief had sat on her like an iron block. But now, this accusation stung more than anything else. "You called yourself a maid but lived like a madam." Kemi ranted. "You think because she took you to parties, you're now family. You think you can play mother and daughter with money that isn't yours." In her fury, Kemi dialed her siblings, instructing them to get on the next flights to Nigeria. She made one more call, to the police. By the next day, Olu and Promise had flown in from the US, and Miracle from Canada. They each arrived with stylish luggage and dark designer sunglasses, heads bowed dramatically as if grief was an accessory to be worn in public. Behind their shades, however, were eyes calculating real estate and bank statements. The moment they were all under the same roof, they became a committee, not of mourning, but of property allocation. "We should begin to document everything now," Promise suggested, pacing the living room like a CEO. "The funeral won't take more than 3 days. After that, we'll need to meet the family lawyer." "Exactly," Olu added, sipping chilled water. "Let's be realistic. Mommy loved us. She must have split things equally. I'll take the Lekki property. Miracle can have the one in Banana Island. Who will take the logistics firm?" Kemi interrupted. "I can run that with my husband." Meanwhile, Chinoza was nowhere to be found. After the arrest warrant was issued, she had been picked up by police from her one-room apartment on the mainland. The cell was dark, the walls damp, the interrogation brutal. "Confess now," the officer barked. "You poisoned the old woman. You had access to her food, didn't you?" "I didn't poison her," she whispered, blood dripping from her swollen lip. "I loved her. She was my only family." "Then why are you the only one named in her daily routines, her travels, her medicines?" The officer continued. "You fed her, you moved her medicine boxes, and she died in your care. Coincidence?" Tortured, broken, and alone, Chinoza said nothing more. Back in Ikoyi, as the children began planning a grand, celebrity-studded burial, Mama Kemi's lawyer, Mr. Ajayi, received an anonymous text. "They've started sharing her wealth like meat at a village feast. It's time." He smiled sadly and picked up the sealed envelope Mama Kemi had handed him weeks before her death. It bore her signature, the official company seal, and a note in her handwriting, "Read only when my body is no longer mine." Mr. Ajayi put a call through to Chinoza's number. There was no answer. Then he called the police. "I'm Barrister Ajayi. I'm calling on behalf of Chief Mrs. Kemisola Oletunji. You're holding the wrong person. I need her released immediately. By the orders of the deceased." The following day, Chinoza was brought out of her cell, her arms trembling, her face bruised but calm. She was taken straight to the mansion where all the children were already gathered, dressed in mourning clothes, but carrying calculators in their minds. The moment they saw her, The chaos resumed. She dares show her face here. She's not even ashamed. She should be handcuffed. But Mr. Ajayi came prepared. Police officers were stationed at the gate. No drama would stop what was about to unfold. Silence, please, he said, standing in the middle of the grand living room where portraits of Mama Kemi hung proudly on the walls. Your mother's final will is about to be read. And in that moment, as the room fell into a tense hush, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken entitlement, none of them knew that their world was about to shatter, not from loss, but from truth. The grand living room of the Oletunji mansion, once alive with warmth and laughter, was now a courtroom of sorts, filled with tension so thick it could slice the air. The chandelier sparkled above like a cruel reminder of everything the children were about to lose, though they didn't know it yet. They sat stiffly in their mother's leather couches, some with crossed arms, some tapping impatient feet. The lawyer, Barrister Ajayi, stood before them with the sealed envelope in his hand, flanked by two uniformed officers. Chinoza stood off to the side, a shadow of herself, face bruised, her hair covered with a scarf, and her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a worn handbag. She didn't look like someone who had just inherited an empire. She looked like someone who had survived the war. Mr. Ajayi cleared his throat and held up the document. This, he began slowly, is the legally binding, final will and testament of Chief Mrs. Kemisola Oletunji. It was signed in my presence, duly notarized and sealed under the instruction that it must only be opened upon her death. The children leaned forward, their eyes gleaming, not with grief, but greed. Olu was already picturing taking over the family's energy company. Promise couldn't wait to rebrand the logistics arm. Miracle mentally redecorated the Banana Island mansion. Kemi. She had already spoken to a lawyer about acquiring full ownership of the Victoria Island estate. Mr. Ajayi opened the envelope, in her own words, he said, then began to read, to my beloved children, Olu, Promise, Kemi, and Miracle, I know this will shock you, and perhaps even anger you, but I pray that one day, you will understand. I gave you everything I had, my youth, my time, my soul. I sent you to the best schools, protected you when your father died, and ran the empire he left us so you would never lack. But what I lacked was you. There was a shift in the room. A crack in the air. Mr. Ajayi continued, as I grew older and weaker, I found myself begging for attention from the very people I gave my life to. I called, and you didn't answer. I asked to see my grandchildren, and you laughed it off. I fell ill, and you postponed your care for work meetings. I was not a priority, I was an afterthought. Kemi's eyes narrowed. Miracle's mouth hung slightly open. Promise swallowed hard, but God, in His mercy, gave me a daughter I did not birth, Chinoza. She was sent to me when I needed love the most. She did not just sweep my floors and stir my soups, she stirred my soul back to life. She held my hand when no one else would. Cried with me, laughed with me, and reminded me what it meant to be seen. Olu slammed his palm against the armrest. Get to the point, Ajayi. Where's the division of assets? The lawyer paused. Then he continued, to fulfill your wish to come back only when I am gone, I have chosen to leave this world quietly and give you the return you desired, not to me, but to my funeral. A loud gasp echoed through the room. I have instructed that all funeral arrangements be managed by Chinoza and her family. You may attend, but only as guests. As for my estate, every company, house, land, bank account, jewelry, vehicle, and even the smallest item I own, including the comb I use every morning, is hereby willed to Chinoza Uchenna and her family. There was a stunned silence. Then the shouting began, this is a lie. Promise backed, she was manipulated. Kemi yelled, standing up, she wasn't in her right mind. Olu accused, Miracle burst into tears. We were coming home in December. It was supposed to be a surprise. But Mr. Ajayi remained firm, this document is legal and final. It has been verified. If you contest it in court, you will lose. Your mother made sure of that. Olu lunged at Chinoza, who flinched and stepped back, but the policeman quickly intervened. She poisoned our mother. Kemi shouted again. That's the only reason she would be written into the will. She didn't, Mr. Ajayi responded coolly. Your mother took her own fate into her hands. In her final journal entry, she confessed to taking heart-weakening medication over time. Her heart was already failing. The toxicology report shows no foreign substance. Your mother died of grief, not poison. The silence that followed was louder than the shouting. Then Mr. Ajayi said the final words that would haunt them forever: she loved you all so much. That she waited until she died to teach you what love really means. Chinoza wept quietly, her body trembling. She had never asked for wealth, yet it was placed at her feet, not because of ambition, but because of compassion. As she walked out of the mansion that day, no longer a maid but now a matriarch, Olu turned away. Kemi collapsed on the couch, Promise lit a cigarette in defeat, and Miracle knelt on the marble floor, sobbing like a child lost in the market, but it was too late. Their mother was gone. And so was everything she once owned. The days that followed the reading of Mama Kemi's will were soaked in chaos, shame, and quiet reckoning. The children scattered like ants after rain, some running to lawyers, others to the press, and one or two even to prophets, hoping to reverse what had already been sealed in ink and spirit. But no voice, legal or spiritual, could undo what the matriarch had declared with her final breath. Chinoza, the once unnoticed maid, now found herself at the helm of an empire she never asked for. Reporters camped outside the Ekoi mansion, whispering of the housemaid who inherited billions, while social media burned with commentary, gossip, and debates. Some called her a witch, others called her blessed. But Chinoza stayed silent. She didn't move into Momo's master bedroom. She didn't flaunt her new wealth. She didn't celebrate. She mourned. On the morning of the burial, Lagos stood still. The city's elite, who had once ignored Mama Kemi's calls, suddenly remembered her grace and generosity. Politicians, CEOs, pastors, and socialites arrived in black and gold agbadas, gaily tied high, luxury cars snaking through the streets. But the true spectacle was not the crowd, it was the simplicity of the burial. Just as Mama Kemi requested, Chinoza insisted on a modest service. No gold-plated caskets, no rented mourners, no performative tears. Her body was wrapped in the same white lace she wore to her husband's burial, the same she had secretly preserved for her own farewell. The children stood on the outskirts of the graveyard, dressed in ash-colored ankara, their eyes empty, their lips sealed. They had been invited, not as family, but as guests. Chinoza didn't gloat. She greeted them with a silent nod. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes swollen. As the priest read the final rites and dust met dust, a strange wind swept through the crowd. Some said it was Momo's spirit. Others said it was justice. But to Chinoza, it was a whisper of peace. A sign that the woman who had filled her with love had now gone to rest. After the ceremony, Chinoza returned to the mansion with her mother and two younger brothers, who had once shared a one-room flat in Ajigona. Now, they sat in awe beneath crystal chandeliers, unsure whether to remove their slippers or speak aloud. "Are we dreaming?" Her mother whispered, tracing her fingers across the velvet curtains. "No, Mama," Chinoza said gently, "God saw us." Meanwhile, the Oletunji children could not escape the weight of their shame. Each retreated into their own corners of regret. Olu and Promise returned to America, but the glimmer of their success had dimmed. They were no longer the sons of a dynasty, but men who had allowed pride to steal their inheritance. Kemi, who once bragged about her pedigree in high society, now avoided public events altogether. Her phone buzzed with pity, not praise. Miracle returned to Canada, and for the first time in her life, she began writing letters to her mother, letters that would never be read. Chinoza, however, didn't bask in revenge or rub salt in wounds. She got to work. With the guidance of barrister Ajayi and Mama Kemi's old business partners, she began managing the estate. She renovated Mama's foundation for widows and orphans, expanded her late boss's scholarship fund, and launched a healthcare outreach program in rural communities, something Mama always dreamed of. She also visited the police station and demanded disciplinary action against the officers who had brutalized her. With her newfound power, reforms were implemented in that station, and an investigation was launched into abusive interrogations. For the first time in Lagos history, a former housemaid turned business tycoon was at the center of a quiet revolution, but perhaps the most poignant moment came when Chinoza walked into the old upstairs library, where Mama Kemi used to sit and read. There, she found the one diary, the one with dried tears stained across its last pages. Tucked inside was a photograph, Chinoza and Mama, laughing on the balcony with a plate of puff-puff between them. On the back, in Mama's handwriting, were the words, "Blood is not what makes a daughter. Love is." Chinoza clutched the photo to her chest, eyes closed, whispering, "I hope I've made you proud." And indeed, she had. In honoring Mama's legacy, she became more than a wealthy woman, she became the daughter Mama Kemi had always prayed for. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Lagos moved on, as it always does. But in the heart of Ikoyi, something remained still. The Oletunji mansion, once a symbol of wealth and aristocracy, had transformed into a home of quiet grace and purpose. Gone were the days when its halls echoed with emptiness and silent tears. Now, laughter warmed the air, prayers floated from the balcony at dawn, and the scent of pepper soup danced through the marble corridors. Chinoza stood in the master bedroom one Saturday morning, dressed in a simple Ankara gown. No jewelry, no makeup. Just barefoot and thoughtful, watching the clouds gather through the window Mama Kemi had always loved. Her mother, Mama Ijeoma, walked in behind her, balancing a tray of hot tea and boiled plantains. "Come and eat, my daughter. You haven't touched anything since morning." "I was just thinking," Chinoza replied softly, taking the tray. "Do you think she's watching us?" Mama Ijeoma smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "She didn't just watch over you. She chose you. There is power in that." Indeed, there was. Under Chinoza's stewardship, the Oletunji Foundation expanded to every region in Nigeria. Children who once hawked pure water now sat in classrooms. Widows found new life through skill acquisition centers named Mama Kemi Hubs. The business empire remained strong, not because Chinoza had a degree in management, but because she led with the same principle Mama Kemi had always lived by, compassion with structure. While she honored the legacy left behind, she didn't erase it. Mama Kemi's portraits remained on the walls. Her room was preserved, not as a shrine, but as a sacred space. Every month, Chinoza invited one struggling single mother to spend a weekend in that room, to remind them that strength could come from sorrow, and healing from hardship. Then came a knock one day, a soft, hesitant one at the gate. It was Miracle. She stood nervously, holding the hands of two small children, both dressed in matching traditional attire. Her husband wasn't with her. Chinoza stepped outside, uncertain. There was silence between them for a long time. "Can I come in?" Miracle asked, eyes glassy. "You don't need to ask," Chinoza said. "This house belonged to your mother." They sat on the veranda where Mama Kemi once sipped zobo in the evenings. Miracle reached into her handbag and pulled out a stack of handwritten letters. "These were for her," she said. "I started writing them after the funeral. But she's gone. So I brought them to you." Chinoza took them silently. Miracle looked around at the vibrant flowers, the cheerful maids, the joyful hum of a home restored. She would have loved this. She hated silence. "I know," Chinoza replied. Then Miracle did something unexpected. She took off her gold earrings, placed them on the table, and bowed her head. "I'm sorry. For everything. We abandoned her. And we blamed you for filling a void we should have never left empty." Chinoza's throat tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached out and held Miracle's hand, the first olive branch between a forgotten bloodline and the girl who loved their mother enough to be her daughter. In the weeks that followed, Olu sent a message from Boston asking to visit. Kemi, too, wrote a long apology letter from Port Harcourt, seeking reconciliation. Promise, ever the proud one, didn't write, but he donated generously to the foundation, and Chinoza understood that was his way of mourning. One Sunday evening, the house was full again, not with mourning children pretending to care, but with grateful hearts. Chinoza's brothers played cards in the living room with Mama Ijeoma. The grandchildren, both Chinoza's nieces and Miracle's kids, ran around barefoot, chasing each other across passion rugs and laughing loudly. Chinoza stood at the edge of the balcony, the same one Mama Kemi stood on every night as she whispered her prayers. The wind lifted her scarf, and she closed her eyes. She wasn't a maid anymore, she was a builder, and this mansion. It wasn't just bricks and gold. It was a house that grief tore down, but love rebuilt, the house that Mama Kemi's heart and Chinoza's loyalty turned from a palace of silence into a sanctuary of healing, and it all began with love.